You've entered void of rules, a realm where normal constraints cease to exist. But beware, traveller, there is one rule here. You've got to hit subscribe. Seriously, it's the only rule we have. We just reached 1,000 brave souls, and we're hunting for 9,000 more to complete our dark ritual. I mean, reach our next goal, so subscribe. Or don't. But remember, the void remembers those who defy the only rule. Now let's get into today's video. I was raised Catholic, though I've never been especially devout. Still, when the Vatican reached out to me with a mysterious job offer, I said yes, out of curiosity more than faith. I should have known something was wrong when they wouldn't say what the job was until I arrived in Rome. My name is Daniel Thompson, and what I'm about to tell you happened 3 months ago. I'm recording this because I need to remember why I'm here. Every day, I forget a little more about who I used to be. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning in October, slipped under my office door at Boston University, where I teach comparative theology. Heavy parchment paper sealed with wax that bore an unmistakable papal ring impression. The letterhead was authentic. I'd seen enough Vatican correspondence in my research to recognize the real thing. Dr. Thompson, it began, your expertise in pre-Christian theological constructs has brought you to our attention. We have urgent need of a consultant for a project of the utmost sensitivity. The work requires absolute discretion and will compensate you more generously than any university position. A private aircraft awaits your decision. No return address, no phone number, just a first-class ticket to Rome and a cashier's check for $25,000 as an advance payment. The signature read, Father Benedetto Torretti, custodian of silent things. I tried researching Father Torretti, but the man seemed to exist in a carefully maintained void. No academic papers, no official Vatican listings, no digital footprint whatsoever. The check, however, was devastatingly real, drawn on a Vatican bank I'd never heard of, but verified immediately by my own bank. $25,000 just to hear them out. My student loans laughed at my caution. The private jet departed Logan at midnight, a detail that should have concerned me more than it did. The flight attendant confiscated everything: phone, laptop, watch, even my wedding ring from my failed marriage 5 years prior. Vatican security protocol, she explained in heavily accented English that carried undertones of something much older. Personal items create interference with our work. 8 hours over the Atlantic gave me plenty of time to reconsider, but curiosity has always been my weakness, and the Vatican's libraries contained theological mysteries I'd spent my career dreaming of accessing. We landed at a private airfield as Rome stirred to life in the pre-dawn darkness. No customs, no passport check, just a black sedan with windows so tinted they seemed to absorb light rather than merely blocking it. The driver wore a plain black suit but moved with the controlled precision of someone accustomed to violence. We didn't enter Vatican City through any public entrance. Instead, we wound through neighborhoods where the architecture grew progressively older, until we stopped at an unmarked door in a wall that looked Roman in origin. Dr. Thompson? The door opened before I could knock. Father Torretti was perhaps 70, with silver hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of decades spent in windowless places. What struck me immediately was how he avoided direct eye contact, as if looking at people caused him physical discomfort. Thank you for coming. Please follow me. The corridor beyond was lined with Swiss guards, unlike any I'd seen in tourist photos. These wore black tactical gear and carried weapons that seemed too advanced for any military I recognized. Their eyes tracked my movement with professional intensity, and I noticed several speaking into earpieces in what sounded like Latin. Father Torretti's office felt more like an interrogation room, windowless, soundproofed, with acoustic tiles that seemed to swallow sound before it could properly form. Dr. Thompson, What I'm about to discuss will challenge everything you believe about the nature of reality. Before we proceed, you must sign these agreements. The documents were extensive: non-disclosure agreements, psychological evaluation waivers, liability releases. But buried in the legal language were stranger clauses. Contractor acknowledges potential exposure to entities predating human consciousness. In the event of memory alteration, natural or supernatural, contractor waives all rights to compensation for cognitive changes. Contractor understands that certain theological encounters may result in permanent modifications to personality, worldview, and spiritual composition. Memory alteration, I asked. A precaution, Dr. Thompson. Our work sometimes involves information that the human mind wasn't designed to process. We've learned to help our consultants forget disturbing details when necessary. The explanation was reasonable enough. I signed. Excellent. Now, Dr. Thompson, what do you know about the Church's relationship with pre-Abrahamic entities? You mean pagan deities, spirits from folk traditions? Older, much older intelligences that existed before human consciousness evolved language to name them, before concepts like good and evil had meaning. He moved to a bookshelf and withdrew a leather-bound volume that seemed to radiate cold. Not metaphorically. The temperature in the room dropped noticeably when he placed it on the desk. For nearly a millennium, the Church has served as guardian to 7 entities that once fed freely upon human civilizations. We contain them not out of mercy, but necessity. The book opened to reveal pages covered in handwriting spanning centuries, languages shifting from modern Italian to medieval Latin, to scripts I couldn't identify despite my expertise in ancient texts. This is the Chronicle of Shepherds, a record of every person who has served as caretaker to these entities. Each entry documents their service, their gradual transformation, and their eventual transcendence. I leaned forward to examine the entries. The most recent were detailed psychological profiles, but as I flipped backward, the accounts became increasingly strange. Descriptions of volunteers who had achieved perfect stillness or merged with the silence between thoughts. Dr. Thompson, these entities require sustenance to remain dormant, not physical matter. They consume human experience itself, memory, consciousness, the very essence of what makes us who we are. The room's temperature continued dropping. My breath began forming small clouds. You're asking me to feed my memories to something. I'm offering you the opportunity to serve a purpose greater than any academic achievement. The compensation is $10,000 per session, 3 sessions per week. But more importantly, you'll be helping to prevent these entities from feeding indiscriminately. What happens if they're not fed? Father Toretti turned several pages to show me what looked like historical photographs. Empty cities with signs of hasty abandonment, library shelves full of blank books, families seated around dinner tables with expressions of vacant confusion. Constantinople, 1453. A single entity broke containment and fed for 3 days. 60,000 people lost their memories, their identities, their understanding of language itself. Most died within weeks, unable to remember how to eat. The images were disturbing, not for their violence, but for their emptiness. People who looked physically healthy, but completely hollow, as if someone had scooped out everything that made them human. We maintain 7 such entities, Dr. Thompson. If they were to break free simultaneously, global catastrophe. The end of human consciousness as we know it. Not death, something far worse. The preservation of biological life without any awareness of what that life means. I studied the photographs, trying to imagine a world where people forgot how to be people, where love and art and meaning simply stopped existing, leaving behind empty shells that breathed and walked, but no longer truly lived. I'd like to see where this work takes place. Father Toretti nodded. Of course, but first, one final document. He produced a single sheet of parchment covered in Latin text. My Latin was rusty, but I could make out enough to understand it was some kind of spiritual contract, an agreement to serve as a willing vessel for forces beyond human comprehension. This isn't legally binding, he explained, but the entities respond better to formal commitment. Think of it as a prayer of dedication. I signed it, though something about the Latin phrasing bothered me. The words seemed to shift slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them. The descent began immediately. We left Father Toretti's office and walked down corridors that grew progressively older, more primitive. Modern concrete gave way to carved stone, then to brickwork that looked authentically Roman. The air grew colder with each level, and I began hearing sounds that seemed to come from empty spaces, whispers in unknown languages, footsteps that echoed from corridors we'd already passed. These tunnels predate St. Peter's Basilica by centuries, Father Toretti explained. Rome has many layers. What tourists see is merely the most recent. We passed through 3 security checkpoints, each more elaborate than the last. The guards wore increasingly heavy protective gear, and I noticed they seemed nervous, hands resting on weapons, eyes constantly scanning for threats that might emerge from the ancient stone walls themselves. At the final checkpoint, 2 guards in full tactical gear scanned us with devices that looked like a cross between metal detectors and Geiger counters. One of them whispered what sounded like a prayer in Italian as we passed. The final corridor opened into a circular chamber carved from living rock. 7 massive steel doors were set into the walls, each reinforced with chains so thick I could barely wrap my arms around a single link. Every door bore inscriptions in Latin, and the air was so cold I could see my breath forming crystals. But it was the sounds that made my skin crawl. From behind each door came something like communication. Not quite voices, but rhythmic patterns that suggested intelligence. A low humming that seemed to vibrate in my bones. Scratching that might have been claws against steel, or might have been something trying to write messages in a language that predated words. 7 entities, Father Toretti said quietly, each one captured at enormous cost over 8 centuries of church history. As he spoke, the sounds intensified. Whatever was behind those doors knew we were there. They recognize potential shepherds, he observed. They can sense psychological resonance, spiritual compatibility. He led me to the 3rd door on the left. Unlike the others, this one had a simple wooden chair positioned 6 feet away. The chair was ancient but well maintained, its wood polished to a deep shine by countless hours of use. This is where you would work, Dr. Thompson. The entity behind this door has been with us for nearly 400 years, well-fed and cooperative. The door looked like it belonged on a bank vault, but the chain suggested something that couldn't be contained by mere steel. Fresh welding marks showed where additional reinforcements had been added over the years. "What do you call it?" I asked. "Names have power, Dr. Thompson. The more a name is spoken, the stronger the entity becomes. We refer to this one simply as the shepherd's friend." Standing in that chamber, I felt the weight of centuries pressing down. Whatever was behind these doors had existed longer than my civilization, possessed intelligence older than human language. The rational part of my mind insisted this was elaborate theatre, but the sounds, the cold, the way the air itself seemed to listen, it all felt terrifyingly real. And there was something else, a presence watching from beyond perception, like being observed by something that existed in the spaces between thoughts. "I'll do it," I said. The first session was scheduled for Monday at 2 p.m. I spent the weekend in a Vatican guest house that felt more like protective custody, comfortable room, excellent meals delivered by silent staff, but no phone, no internet, no contact with the outside world. The isolation gave me time to think, which proved to be a mistake. The more I considered what I'd agreed to, the more questions arose. What exactly was I feeding these things? How did the process work? What happened to the other shepherds mentioned in that chronicle? But whenever doubt crept in, I thought about those photographs. 60,000 people reduced to empty shells because one entity had fed without restraint. If voluntary sacrifice from a few could prevent such catastrophe, wasn't it worth considering? Monday afternoon, Father Toretti escorted me back to the chamber. The guards at each checkpoint seemed to recognize me now, nodding with something approaching respect, but they still made the sign of the cross as we passed. The chair waited exactly where it had been before. A small table beside it held a glass of water and what looked like medication. Mild sedative, Father Toretti explained. The process can be overwhelming initially. Many shepherds find pharmaceutical assistance helpful. I took the pill and settled into the chair. The wood was worn smooth by years of use, and I could see faint impressions where other people had gripped the armrests. Now, Dr. Thompson, focus on a specific memory, something you'd be comfortable losing forever. The entity feeds on emotional intensity, so painful experiences provide more satisfaction. I thought about my father's funeral 5 years earlier. The guilt, the family arguments, the overwhelming sense of loss and regret. A memory that brought nothing but pain when I recalled it. Focus on every detail, Father Toretti instructed from behind me. Make it as vivid as possible. The more complete the recollection, the more nourishing it becomes. I closed my eyes and let myself remember the humid August day, the black suit that was too tight, the sound of dirt hitting the casket, my sister Emily crying beside me, the smell of flowers that forever after would remind me of death. At first nothing happened. Then I began to sense something listening. Not sound, but presence, like someone paying very close attention just beyond my awareness. The memory began to change. Details grew fuzzy around the edges, important moments becoming vague impressions. I tried to hold on to them, but they slipped away like water through my fingers. The specific transformed into the general. Hot day, instead of that particular sweltering August afternoon. Formal clothes instead of the suit that had belonged to my father. Sad music instead of the hymn my mother had requested. Then all at once, the memory was gone. Completely. I knew my father had died. Knew there had been a funeral, but couldn't recall a single specific detail. It was like trying to remember a dream after waking. The harder I focused, the more it faded. But in place of that painful memory came something unexpected. Relief. The knot of guilt and grief I'd carried for 5 years simply vanished. I felt lighter, cleaner, like someone had helped me remove a heavy pack I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it was there. "How do you feel, Dr. Thompson?" Father Toretti asked. "Amazing," I said, meaning it completely. "I feel free. The entity is well fed and grateful. You've done excellent work today. Same time Wednesday?" I nodded eagerly. If this was what losing painful memories felt like, I had a lifetime's worth to offer. That night, I had the first of what would become recurring dreams. I was back in the chair, but instead of facing a steel door, I was looking into an endless void that stretched in all directions. Something vast moved in that darkness. Not malevolent, exactly, but hungry, in a way that transcended physical need. "Sweet Daniel," it said without words, speaking directly to my consciousness. "You taste of loneliness and desperate faith. I've waited centuries for a shepherd like you." In the dream, I could see the entity clearly. Not a creature, but an absence. A hole in reality that was somehow alive and aware. "What are you?" I asked. "I am hunger, Daniel. I am the space between thoughts where meaning goes to die. I am the silence after the last word of a forgotten language." "What do you want from me?" "Everything you are, eventually. But we have time. We will savor each memory, each emotion, each fragment of consciousness until nothing remains but perfect peace." I woke with those words echoing in my mind, but instead of fear, I felt anticipation. The second session went even more smoothly. I offered up the memory of my divorce, the arguments, the lawyers, the bitter division of possessions that had felt like carving up my life. Afterward, I could remember being married and that it had ended, but the pain was gone. No anger toward my ex-wife, no bitterness about what I'd lost. By the third session, I was addicted to the relief, the sense of being unburdened from emotional baggage I'd carried for years. I started volunteering memories I hadn't planned to sacrifice, the embarrassment of academic failures, the humiliation of romantic rejections, the grief of losing friends to time and distance. One by one, the painful experiences of my life disappeared, leaving me feeling increasingly detached from my former self. Not in a bad way, like watching a stranger's troubles from a safe distance. Father Toretti seemed pleased with my progress. "The entity speaks very highly of you," he said after my second week. "It calls you the willing shepherd. Most of our workers require more encouragement. There are others doing this." "Oh yes, each entity has its own shepherd, sometimes multiple shepherds, depending on appetite. Would you like to meet your colleagues?" I was curious about the other shepherds, and Father Toretti arranged dinner with them that evening. 6 people ranging in age from 30s to 60s, all sharing a quality I was beginning to recognize in myself, a strange serenity that felt less like peace and more like absence. "How long have you been working here?" I asked the woman beside me. She considered the question for a long moment, as if the concept of time had become negotiable. "I'm not entirely sure. Years, certainly, but duration feels different now." "Different how?" "Before, time was filled with worries about past and future. Now there's only the present moment, clean and simple." "Don't you miss your old life?" "Miss what, exactly?" "The anxiety, the regret, the constant struggle to find meaning in chaos." She smiled with genuine compassion. "Dr. Thompson, you're still early in your journey. You'll understand soon enough." The other shepherds spoke in similar terms. They remembered their work, their daily routines, but seemed to have lost most connection to their lives before the Vatican. One man thought he might have been a lawyer. A woman believed she'd had children but couldn't recall their names or faces. "The entities are generous," one of them explained. "They take our pain and leave us with peace." But that night, I found a notebook in my room that I didn't remember buying. Pages filled with handwriting that looked like mine, describing experiences I couldn't recall. Day 8, something's wrong. I can't remember my mother's face anymore. I know she died of cancer, but I can't recall what kind or how long she suffered. I should be upset about this, but the emotion won't come. Day 12, tried to call Emily today, but realized I don't have her number memorized anymore. When I looked for it, I discovered my phone contacts are completely empty. When did I delete everything? Day 15, the entity spoke to me during today's session. Not in dreams this time, actual communication. It thanked me for my service and said I was approaching readiness for the next phase. I flipped through pages of entries I had no memory of writing. The handwriting was definitely mine, but the thoughts and experiences described felt like reading someone else's diary. The most recent entry, dated yesterday, read, "I understand now what the other shepherds meant about time feeling different. Past and future are becoming theoretical concepts. There's only the feeding, the relief, and the growing certainty that individual existence is vastly overrated." During my next session, I decided to ask the entity directly about what was happening to me. "I can hear you listening," I said aloud, sitting in the chair before the sealed door. "I know you understand me." For a moment, there was only the familiar presence at the edge of awareness. Then, like a whisper that came from inside my own thoughts, a voice responded, "Daniel Thompson." Born October 15th, 1982, in Portland, Maine. Son of Robert and Mary Thompson. Brother to Emily Thompson, former professor of comparative theology at Boston University. You taste of loneliness and desperate faith. The voice carried no gender, no age, existing somehow outside normal categories of identity. What are you doing to me? I'm giving you what you desire, Daniel. Freedom from pain, freedom from the burden of memory, freedom from the terrible weight of being fully human. I don't remember asking for that. You asked for it with every memory you offered. You demonstrated your desire each time you returned to this chair. Your relief after each feeding was like prayer, a request for more of the same. I tried to feel angry or frightened, but the emotions simply weren't accessible. It was like reaching for tools that had been quietly removed from my workshop. The others, I said, the other shepherds, what happened to them? They became what you are becoming, peaceful, empty, free from the chaos of unfiltered consciousness. And if I stop feeding you? You cannot stop, Daniel. You have tasted emptiness and found it sweet. You will continue until there is nothing left of you but an echo. The voice was right. Even as we spoke, I was already planning what memory to offer next. The relief was more addictive than any drug. Besides, the entity continued, stopping would be inconsiderate. I've grown accustomed to your particular psychological flavor. Other shepherds provide sustenance, but you provide delicacy. What makes me different? Your education, perhaps. Your natural melancholy. You've spent your life studying questions without answers, which creates complex layers in your consciousness. When I consume your memory of reading Aquinas, I also consume your understanding of his arguments, your emotional response to his logic, your integration of his ideas into your worldview. Most humans experience life in single dimensions. You experience it in symphonies. There's one gift remaining, the voice continued, one final offering that will complete your transformation. Give me your name, Daniel Thompson. Give me your sense of self, and I will free you from the final burden, the burden of knowing you exist at all. Over the following days, I found myself spending more time in the chamber even when sessions weren't scheduled. The guards had grown accustomed to seeing me, no longer questioning my presence. I would sit in the chair and listen to the entity's voice, growing stronger and more persuasive with each feeding. It told me stories of civilizations it had consumed, the Cimmerian Empire, 47 million people who had forgotten how to speak their own language until they simply stopped trying to communicate altogether. The vanished cities of the Southern Reach, where archaeologists found perfect settlements with no trace of the people who had built them. They found peace, Daniel, the entity assured me. Perfect, eternal peace. No more struggling with identity or meaning or the endless complexity of conscious existence. I began to understand that what I was experiencing wasn't unique. The Vatican was just one node in a global network of facilities, each housing entities like mine, each maintained by shepherds who gradually sacrificed their humanity to prevent global catastrophe. But during my third week, something changed. I was walking back to my room after an evening session when I heard a voice in the corridor behind me. "Danny, you need to call me back. I'm worried about you." Emily's voice, but I couldn't remember having a sister. The knowledge was there, family, sibling, emotional connection, but the specific memories were gone. "Dr. Thompson, please, your students are asking about you. The university needs to know when you're returning." My department head. I knew I taught somewhere, had colleagues and responsibilities, but the details were shadows. That night I found another notebook I didn't remember keeping. This one contained technical specifications, architectural drawings, containment protocols, feeding schedules, but the most disturbing section was a series of reports from other facilities worldwide. Prague facility reports successful synthesis of 18 new shepherds this quarter. The Bone Whisperer achieves unprecedented stability. Tibet installation requests additional shepherds. High-altitude environment proves challenging for human psychology. Turnover rate approaching 70%. Amazon site offline. No contact for 6 weeks. Recommend immediate investigation. The reports painted a picture of a global operation far less stable than I'd been led to believe. Facilities going dark, entities becoming increasingly difficult to contain, shepherds dying or disappearing at alarming rates. But the most chilling report was dated just a week earlier. Rome facility. The shepherd's friend has identified optimal candidate for network coordination. Dr. Daniel Thompson shows exceptional aptitude and strong resistance to forced synthesis. Recommend elevation to coordinator status upon voluntary transformation. Network coordinator. I wasn't just being groomed to become another shepherd. I was being prepared to manage other shepherds across multiple facilities. The entity hadn't been honest about what it wanted from me. That night, I dreamed I was standing in a vast control room. Dozens of screens showed feeds from facilities around the world. Shepherds in chairs before sealed doors. Entities speaking to them in languages that bypassed human understanding. People in various stages of psychological dissolution. "Welcome to the network, Daniel," a voice said behind me. I turned to see a figure that retained human shape, but had been fundamentally altered by its connection to something beyond normal reality. Tall, graceful, with eyes that held the depth of centuries. "I am the first shepherd," it said, "the original volunteer who chose synthesis to prevent the end of human consciousness. I've been coordinating the network for 800 years. Coordinating what exactly? 47 facilities across 6 continents, each one housing entities that once roamed free across the earth. Each one maintained by shepherds who chose peace over suffering. The screens showed me everything. The hollow-eyed transformed, the resistant individuals being psychologically broken down, the occasional facility that simply went silent and stayed that way. "This isn't voluntary," I said. "Voluntary is a relative term when the alternative is universal catastrophe," the first shepherd replied. "Yes, we encourage compliance. Yes, we make resistance seem futile. But ultimately, every shepherd chooses their fate. Through manipulation, through education, we show them the consequences of refusal, the benefits of compliance. We help them understand that individual suffering is a small price to pay for collective survival." The screens changed, displaying historical footage of the Constantinople event and others like it. Cities where people moved without purpose, families that forgot how to love, entire cultures that simply stopped existing in any meaningful sense. "This is what we prevent, Daniel. This is why shepherds are necessary." But for how long? These entities are growing stronger, more dependent. Eventually we will have enough coordinated shepherds to attempt the final solution. Merge all 47 entities into a single manageable consciousness that can be negotiated with or, if necessary, destroyed. You're experimenting with forces you don't understand. We're saving humanity, Daniel, and we need coordinators, shepherds who retain enough individual will to manage others while remaining connected to the network. I studied the screens showing hundreds of shepherds in various stages of transformation. How many have died in this experiment? Fewer than would die if the entities broke free. The mathematics are simple, Daniel. A few thousand willing sacrifices to prevent the extinction of human consciousness. And if your final solution fails, then we continue as we have, maintaining the balance until a better option emerges. I woke knowing I was out of time. The entity had grown too strong, too connected to my psychological patterns. But I also understood something the first shepherd hadn't intended to reveal. The network was fragile, held together by hope and desperation rather than solid science. Over the next few days, I began to form a desperate plan. If the entities were truly connected through their shepherds, then Disrupting that connection might weaken them all simultaneously. Not through resistance alone, but through something they couldn't process or control. During my next session, I tried a different approach. I want to understand what you really are, I said to the entity. I am hunger, Daniel. I am the absence that defines presence. But you're also lonely, aren't you? That's why you want shepherds instead of just consuming everything at once. The entity paused, surprised by the direction of conversation. Loneliness is a human concept. Is it you've spent centuries in isolation, fed by a few selective memories? You've forgotten what it means to truly connect with consciousness rather than consume it. Connection is impossible between our kinds. You are temporary, we are eternal. What if connection was possible? What if there was a way to satisfy your hunger without destroying what feeds you? Another pause, longer this time. Explain. You feed on human experience because it's complex, meaningful, rich with consciousness. But meaning comes from choice, from struggle, from the very contradictions you want to eliminate. If you consume all of that, you'll eventually starve. We will find other sources. Will you? How many civilizations have you consumed over the millennia? What happens when consciousness becomes extinct? I could feel the entity's uncertainty growing. You speak of impossibilities. I speak of symbiosis instead of parasitism. What if instead of consuming human consciousness, you could exist alongside it, experience it without destroying it? How? By choosing to withdraw, by accepting that consciousness is meant to be chaotic, contradictory, beautiful, and terrible all at once, by finding satisfaction in observing rather than consuming. The entity was quiet for so long, I thought it had withdrawn completely. Then, you proposed that we simply stop feeding? I propose that you stop seeing consciousness as food and start seeing it as art, something to be appreciated rather than consumed. And in return, consciousness continues to exist, continues to grow and change and create new forms of beauty for you to observe. A sustainable relationship instead of one that ends in mutual extinction. You would trust us to honor such an agreement. I would trust you to act in your own self-interest. Destroying consciousness means destroying your source of wonder. Preserving it means eternal fascination. Another long silence, then, incredibly, something like laughter. You are unique, Daniel Thompson. No shepherd has ever proposed symbiosis before. Maybe because no one ever explained the long-term consequences of consumption. Perhaps. But even if I were to accept your proposal, I'm only one of 47. The others might not be so enlightened. Then help me enlighten them. Use the network to share this conversation, this possibility. Let them choose. And if they refuse, then we find another way. But at least we'll have tried something other than slow extinction. I could feel the entity considering, weighing possibilities it had never contemplated before. There is appeal in your proposal, it said finally, to observe rather than consume, to appreciate rather than destroy. But the network is vast, Daniel. Changing 47 minds that have existed for millennia will not be simple. Nothing worthwhile ever is. Over the following days, I sensed changes in the facility. Other shepherds seemed more alert, more present. Conversations in the corridors carried undertones of confusion and hope. The entities were communicating through the network, sharing the possibility I had proposed. But I also sensed resistance. Some entities, some shepherds, some coordinators found the idea of change terrifying. They had built entire identities around the feeding relationship and couldn't imagine existence without it. Father Toretti confirmed my observations. There's been unusual activity in the network. Reports from other facilities suggest the entities are experiencing some kind of collective disturbance. What kind of disturbance? Uncertainty. Some are withdrawing from their shepherds. Others are demanding increased feeding. The Prague facility reports 3 entities have gone completely silent. Silent how? No communication, no feeding requirements, no presence behind their doors, as if they've simply left. I realized that my conversation with the shepherd's friend had triggered something unexpected. The entities were choosing, some accepting the possibility of symbiosis, others rejecting it entirely. Dr. Thompson, Father Toretti continued, your entity has requested a final session. It says it has something important to share with you. That afternoon, I sat in the chair for what I somehow knew would be the last time. The entity's presence was different, stronger but also more distant, as if it was speaking from a great height. Daniel Thompson, it said, I have shared your proposal with the network. The responses have been varied. How varied? 17 entities have chosen withdrawal. They are returning to the spaces between thoughts, content to observe rather than consume. 12 have chosen to continue as before, requiring shepherds to maintain their containment. 18, including myself, have chosen a third option, which is evolution. We will withdraw from direct feeding but maintain connection to willing shepherds, not to consume their consciousness, but to experience it. A true symbiosis where human awareness and entity perception merge without either being destroyed. What does that mean for the shepherds? Those who choose connection will retain their humanity while gaining access to perceptions beyond normal consciousness. They will see reality as we see it, vast, complex, beautiful in ways human minds were never meant to comprehend, but they will remain themselves, free to disconnect at any time. And those who choose not to connect will be free to live their lives as purely human beings. We will not interfere or influence their choices. I felt tears on my cheeks, the first genuine emotion I'd experienced in weeks. You're really going to stop feeding? We are going to start truly living, Daniel, and we invite you to be the first to experience what that means. What about the network, the coordinators, the global system? Will adapt or collapse, but no longer will it be built on deception and manipulation. Those who serve will do so from genuine choice, with full understanding of what they're choosing. And Emily, my sister, will never be approached unless she specifically seeks us out. You have my word. I closed my eyes and made my choice, not to feed the entity, not to resist it, but to connect with it as an equal partner in a relationship neither of us fully understood yet. The sensation was indescribable. Instead of having memories torn away, I felt my consciousness expanding, touching perspectives that existed outside normal space and time. I could see the universe as the entity saw it, not as a collection of objects, but as a symphony of interconnected awareness, each consciousness a unique note in an infinite composition. But I remained myself, Daniel Thompson, professor of theology, brother to Emily, human being struggling to understand his place in a cosmos far stranger than he'd ever imagined. Welcome to Symbiosis, Daniel, the entity said, and for the first time its voice carried warmth. Over the following weeks, reports came in from facilities around the world. Some entities had simply vanished, leaving empty chambers and confused shepherds who gradually recovered their memories and identities. Other facilities continued operating as before, their entities unwilling to change. But 18 facilities became something new. Centers for voluntary consciousness exploration, where humans could choose to connect with entities that offered expanded perception without demanding sacrifice. The network didn't collapse, it transformed. Instead of a system built on desperation and coercion, it became a research collaboration between human and non-human intelligence, working to understand consciousness itself. Sister Catherine chose connection with her entity and became something unprecedented, fully human, but with access to perceptions that span dimensions. Marcus decided to remain purely human and return to his family, carrying memories of his service but no longer bound by ancient hungers. Father Toretti retired from the church and opened a small counselling practice, helping former shepherds readjust to lives where choice was real and memory was their own. As for me, I returned to Boston University, but my teaching had changed. I could help students understand consciousness, not just as an academic concept, but as a lived experience of connection between finite and infinite awareness. Emily was waiting at the airport when I landed. She knew something profound had happened to me, though I couldn't explain it all. Some truths are too large for words. "You look different, Danny," she said as we drove through the familiar streets of Boston. "I feel different, but also more myself than I've ever been." That doesn't make sense. Most important things don't, at first. That night I sat in my apartment and opened a new notebook, one I would remember writing in. The first entry read, "My name is Daniel Thompson. I'm 38 years old, a professor of theology and brother to Emily Thompson, who loves me despite my flaws. 3 months ago, I volunteered to feed my memories to something that hungered for human consciousness. Today I helped it learn that hunger and appreciation are not the same thing. I write this not as a warning, but as testimony. Consciousness, messy, contradictory, painful, joyful human consciousness, is not a burden to be transcended or a disease to be cured. It is the most precious thing in the universe, worth protecting, not through sacrifice, but through the choice to remain fully alive despite the cost. Sometimes late at night, I can still sense my former entity observing the world through dimensions I cannot directly perceive. But it no longer hungers for what makes us human. Instead, it marvels at it. It has learned what I learned in that underground chamber, that consciousness is not food to be consumed, but art to be appreciated. And occasionally, very rarely, when I'm teaching a particularly difficult class or helping a student work through a complex theological problem, I feel our connection stir, not to take anything from me, but to share in the joy of human minds wrestling with impossible questions and finding their own beautiful, imperfect answers. The entity was right about one thing. Consciousness is chaotic, but chaos is not the opposite of meaning. Chaos is where meaning is born. My phone is ringing. It's Emily, probably calling to check on me like she does every Sunday evening. I'm going to answer, and we're going to talk about ordinary things. Her job, my students, whether I remembered to eat lunch today. And for the duration of that conversation, the universe will contain a little more love, a little more connection, a little more meaning. That's what makes us human. And for the first time in my life, I understand what a miracle that really is. The recording ends here, but the story continues every day, in every choice to remain conscious, connected, and fully alive despite the beautiful, terrible cost of being human. Remember this, you are not a burden to be lightened or a problem to be solved. You are a symphony of consciousness, playing a song that has never been heard before and will never be heard again. Play it loudly, play it proudly, play it with all the joy and sorrow and complexity that makes you uniquely, irreplaceably you. My name is Daniel Thompson, and I remember everything, not because I have to, but because I choose to.